Hi, I'm Traylon Rao, and I'll be reading Psalm 118, verse 14 through 29. And I'll be reading from the Message. God's my strength, he's also my song, and now he's my salvation. Do you hear the shouts, hear the triumph songs in the camp of the save? The hand of God has turned the tide. The hand of God is raised in victory. The hand of God has turned the tide. I didn't die, I lived, and now I'm telling the world what God did. God tested me, he pushed me hard, but he didn't hand me over to death. Swing wide the city gates, the righteous gates. I'll walk right through and thank God. This temple gate belongs to God, so the victors can enter and praise. Thank you for responding to me. You've truly become my salvation. The stone the masons discarded as flawed is now the capstone. This is God's work. We rub our eyes. We can hardly believe it. This is the very day God acted. Let's celebrate and be festive. Salvation now, God, salvation now. Oh yes, God, a free and full life. Blessed are you who enter in God's name. From God's house we bless you. God is good. He has bathed us in light. Festoon the shrine with garlands. Hang colored banners above the altar. You're my God, and I thank you. Oh my God, I lift high your praise. Thank God, he's so good. His love never quits.
Our speaker this morning is Erica Littlewolf. She is of Northern Cheyenne and Jewish descent, which is an interesting combination. She grew up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in southeastern Montana, attending the White River Cheyenne Mennonite Church. She has volunteered with the MCC since prior to 2000 and has been formally employed there since 2007. She coordinates the Indigenous Visions Center, focusing on building relationships between Native American people and non-Native American people. Erica will present the sermon this morning and also direct a simulation after the sermon, after the service, called The Loss of Turtle Island, with the assistance of Karen Kaufman-Wall. Would you at least be recognized? Karen has worked with the Mennonite Central Committee Central States as the Peace and Justice Education Coordinator since 2002. Her work focuses on raising awareness and encouraging action among MCC's constituency toward dismantling oppression and peace based on justice. As I said earlier, this simulation will be immediately following the service. It will be here in the sanctuary. So once the service is over, if you need to get a drink, use a restroom, come on back. I believe Karen said she would like for people to sit as close to the front as possible. We're going to be spreading out blankets. We're going to ask more volunteers because we didn't have very many sign up. So we want a few more brave souls. Maybe one encouragement will be that you will not have to speak. And so you just stand on a blanket. It's really quite simple, right? Yeah. So again, we want to welcome Erica.
I was excited to see all the children come forward with their change. And one thing I noticed is they have the same wallet, the Ziploc bag. And I remember that as a child, like saving up my Ziploc bag, and then you'd lose a few because you didn't quite latch it right. Welcome one hat na dincheve natistas pivawana. My name is Erica Littlewolf. I am Northern Cheyenne from southeastern Montana. As was stated, I grew up in the White River Mennonite Church, which is located in Busby, Montana, and my parents went there. My dad did, as did my grandparents, and my grandfather was a lay pastor at that Mennonite church. I attended college in South Dakota at Black Hills State University, and originally was going to go into accounting, and I got so far in and I decided, no. And so I went into psychology, and I happened to take a Native American Studies class. I think I had to actually take that class, and then it grew my interest, and so then I ended up double majoring in Native Studies and psychology. And I didn't think I needed the course because I grew up as that is my reality. But seeing the systemic reality and the laws that the U.S. government has created, actually, I was, wow, a whole new world opened up. And then I realized that MCC, an organization that I hold near and dear, works with Indigenous people. And so that primed my volunteering and eventually my employment with MCC. And so this morning, I don't like to think of myself as a preacher, so I'm going to share. But also give an invitation for our activity. I have a circle support group with Karen on there and some people from Canada, and it is fabulous. It's 1 hour, and if you never got Native American history in any form in school, this is a quick little rundown. And as Mark said, you don't have to participate. I'm shy, surprise. Yeah, you can stand, and if you would like to read, it's all written out for you, but that is not necessarily needed, and it gives you a thorough depiction of Native history. And so when I was talking with Mark, I couldn't figure out what I wanted to talk on, and so hopefully I'm talking on the modern realities of Native people, but hopefully this will prime your curiosity of why did things get the way they are now. I see a couple people in the audience that I know and who have been to the reservation, and so we'll be familiar with these realities. And the activity will take you back in history as to how it developed. It didn't just happen overnight. It's been a long process. And so maybe we may get a little hopeless with the things I'm going to share with you, but we'll come out of that by the end. So feel free to go to the depths of your despair in the next maybe 10 minutes or so. First of all, the thing I want to share is when you go on a reservation, the first thing you'll notice is the poverty. At my father's house, the water is not drinkable. We have to drink bottled water. It causes H. pylori, which is the main bacteria that causes ulcers. And so we do not drink our water, and we don't have an abundance of water. We can bathe in it and do things like that. But you'll see that there's inadequate housing for people, maybe 10, 20 people that live in one house. And so when we were hit by a forest fire, I think 10 houses, 15 houses burned down, but that affects a huge amount of people. And so one thing I like to start off with is also health statistics. And I have them written down. And diabetes is one of the main things we have on our reservation. And they link that to the loss of our original food source, which was the bison. And when we were forced on reservations, we were given commodities, which is government food, which is high in calories. Only that didn't just stay with that one instance, it continued. And so these are people's daily diets. And what I find now is we're called a food desert. And so local grocers will not bring in fresh fruit or vegetables onto the reservation because it's not seen as a market. And so growing up, I didn't have access to fresh fruit or vegetables. And we also have this, I think they call it the starving obesity complex, which is actually you're not getting the nutrients you want, but yet you're overweight. And so I think when people see that people are overweight, they think, oh, they must be overeating. But in fact, their body's starving for nutrients and they're eating the wrong types of food because of what's available to them and the lack of income. So as of 2010, 2.9 million Alaska Natives and American Indians have diabetes. This is 2.3 times higher than non-Hispanic whites. It's 9 times higher for youth aged 10 to 19 who have type 2 diabetes compared to non-Hispanic whites. And there is a 110% increase in diagnosed diabetes from 1990 to 2009 in youth aged 15 to 19. And some of our leading causes of death are, the number one is cancer. The second one is heart disease, and I believe that's probably linked to the introduction of commercial tobacco. The third is unintentional injuries, and I wasn't sure what this was, and so I looked more into it, and it means car wrecks. It can also include suicide, anything that's not a disease. Diabetes is our fourth. We have chronic liver disease and cirrhosis, and I believe that's linked to the introduction of alcohol. Chronic lower respiratory diseases, stroke, suicide, nephritis, nephrotic syndrome, and nephrosis, influenza, and pneumonia. People are still dying from the flu and from pneumonia. And so along with that, we have disease. And another thing that we have, what I'll refer to as assimilation. We still do not have control over our own children. Through the exercise, we'll talk a lot about boarding schools. And what has happened now is, as a part of that, they developed the Indian Child Welfare Act. And what that was supposed to do was, if a child was removed from their home, they were supposed to be given to the tribe or to another tribe. But what has happened is they had a recent case in 2013 called the Baby Veronica case. And the father was not notified that he had a child, and it was a native father, non-native mother, and this child was given up for adoption. And he found out he had a child, and so he went through the court system to try to get that child, but they agreed that it only applied to mothers, and so this father did not have access to his child, and the child was located in Oklahoma and was adopted out onto the East Coast. And so there's still cases like that. In South Dakota, there are 700 children removed from their homes per year in South Dakota. And in 2002, 14.1 per 1,000, compared to 4.6 per 1,000 non-Hispanic white children were removed from their families. And they're usually put in group homes or housed with non-native families. And the other thing that I want to spend a significant amount of time on, because I feel affected as an Indigenous woman, is the Violence Against Women Act. There's historically been violence against Native women. If you're aware of the Sand Creek Massacre in Denver, they just had their 150th commemoration, and that was actually my tribe. And we hear stories from our elders of body parts being removed from women, and they would put them on their hats or wear them in some fashion and parade through Denver, Colorado. And I just heard yesterday from one of my friends at the ILIF seminary that they have this book on display. And everyone forgot why this book was so significant. And so they started doing research. And the significance of that book was not the book itself, it was what it was covered in, which was actually skin from the Sand Creek Massacre. And so once they found that out, they removed it and returned it back to the tribe. But there's a long history of that, and especially towards Native women. So this Violence Against Women Act, prior to it being instated, I have horrible language. It hit the market in March. But prior to that, non-Native men could go on a reservation and do anything they wanted to Native women, and there was no court in the world in which they could be held accountable. Native men could abuse women, and there's tribal court, state court, federal court. But there was a loophole in the system that allowed for this to happen. And so they did this Violence Against Women Act, which says that now they can be prosecuted. But the interesting thing is even this law has loopholes, which says this person has to know this person beyond just one occasion. So what happens on my reservation is we have resource extraction. And people coming in because we have low-level coal deposits. And so what it would do if we went with it was to bring in a coal miners, which are from the outside. It would, much like the Bakken oil fields, bring in a train, a railway, and what that actually brings to Native communities is human trafficking and the trafficking of children. And so with this law in place, even now, if resource extraction blows up around Native communities, the women can be abused and the men cannot be held accountable. And to bring it a little more closer to home, I was recently mugged in October. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I was with my mother at the time, and I followed all the rules, go to Target at light and go in a parking lot that's lit and everything. Followed the rules, it still happened. And thank God it happened in Albuquerque, because had this crime happened on a reservation, nothing would happen. In my case, the police came, which I'm not necessarily for policing, but the police came and then the guy was tried and it went through some sort of process. But had this happened on the reservation, nothing would have happened. The guy is loose and nothing, I didn't know who he was. And so even with this law instated, there is still no recourse for someone's actions. But it's also interesting because I think the biggest link I make with that is I have 3 little nieces that live on the reservation. And if we don't bring attention to these brutalities and our tribes go forth with resource extraction, this makes this population extremely vulnerable. And it's not just happening in the U.S., it's also happening in Mexico. I visited the border wall there. And it's also happening in Canada. Currently in Canada, as of 1970, there are 1,100 and I think it's 58 murdered and missing Native women. The government was pushed to go through a process of figuring that number out through the UN. And so they thought it was maybe around 500 and found out it was actually doubled that rate. And it's a lot of trafficking of women. And the most recent case is horrible. A woman was died from an incident. The guy admitted that he did it, but the court still found him not guilty. And if you're curious about it, it's horrible. I will not even say what happened in it. You can Google Cindy Gladue. It's Gladue, and you can read the what actually happened in that case, and it's horrible all around. But it's interesting, many Native women have been making connections between the destruction to the Mother Earth, they like the extraction industries, and to the destruction of Native bodies. And I like this quote that comes from Lisa Brunner from the White Earth Ojibwe. And she says, "They treat Mother Earth like they treat women. They think they can own us, buy us, sell us, trade us, rent us, poison us, rape us, destroy us, use us as entertainment, and kill us. I'm happy to see that we are talking about the level of violence that is occurring against Mother Earth because it equates to us. What happens to her happens to us." And I love that that is being looked at. I think also what Native communities are addressing is these are a lot of things that are happening over years and years and years. But what we're starting to look at, and even in my home community, is these can all be lumped into one thing, which is historical trauma. And we actually get that knowledge out of the Holocaust with the Jewish people. And so these are symptoms of what has been happening over years and years and years. And so when people say, why don't they just get over it? Or why don't they just pull themselves up by their bootstraps? This is why we can't get over it, because it hasn't stopped. And so that's another thing that we're looking at. And the hope in it all, where I find hope is actually interesting because the churches have been a part of a lot of these processes, and the Mennonite church included. But the interesting thing is that is exactly where I find hope. Churches have a lot of power, and churches have a lot of people that want to do good things, and especially Mennonites with reconciliation and all that stuff. And I'm looking at you because I think of the fire that we had on our reservation, and our land is divided into so many different types of land that when the fire happened, fire trucks were driving by people's burning houses because of who owned that land. And so the only people that could adequately respond were the churches, even faster than the Red Cross. And so MCC had kits in there with soap and stuff, everything needed before the Red Cross, because the Red Cross has tons of loopholes. And so and the Mennonites were also able to come in and rebuild some of the fencing because we have a lot of cattle that all the fencing burned down, and they were able to respond because they do not have the loopholes that other agencies have. And so I find a lot of hope in the work I do because we uncover all these atrocious things and we feel horrible. And I work with Karen, and the work gets heavy, but at the same time, it's very life-giving for some reason. And I remember my friend Salo Padilla, who works on immigration, he said, the border is very hopeless, yet there's life there. And that's exactly how I feel with the work that I do. And I'm thankful that MCC sees this as an opportunity to engage constituents and get people involved. It's not easy work. We cry a lot. Feels good to cry. But it's also very rewarding with the people we meet. And I know with this exercise that we do, people are always saying, why were we not told this in school? And so it's always rewarding to educate and be in relationship with people, and especially to be invited here. And so thanks for the invitation. I remember the guy, but I'm not seeing him anywhere. But yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very, very privileged to be here. And I think I'll go ahead and end there. I hope that's enough to spark your curiosity into participating in the activity. If you can't stand, you can still sit around and get a lot of the information. We'll have it up on a PowerPoint. But again, thank you so much for inviting me to be here.